This lecture is going to look at divorce mediation as a context for alternative dispute resolution. Divorce mediation is a common application of dispute mediation and one that can yield some very positive results, especially when the dispute involves children. The National Conflict Resolution Center provides a useful chart to break down some benefits of mediation, and I'll pull that up in a moment, but I want to give you a summary of it first. And I want you to note that mediation can benefit disputants in cost, time involved, tone of process, how positive or negative it is, the impact on children, the emotional investment involved, the impact on long-term communication, decision-making, and confidentiality. These are all things that mediation can stand to benefit in the divorce mediation process. So here's the chart, and I want you to look specifically at each area here. So starting with rate, you're looking at $300 an hour for mediation time, document preparation fee, which is about $1,800 to $3,800. The total that you're going to be looking at is $2,000 to $5,000 versus litigation, which is having traditional attorneys in a court setting, for $20,000 per person. The average total is $2,000 to $5,000 for mediation. So in terms of cost, there's an enormous advantage to mediating. And this comes from an organization from the National Conflict Resolution Center that does mediations every day. Check out the time involved here. We're looking at 3 to 6 months rather than 2 years for litigation. You would have a more informal approach through mediation and a more formal and often adversarial approach in a litigation context. The legal approach is also different, so the legal information is provided by the mediator, but there's no legal advice, whereas in a litigation context, you would have formal legal advice coming from an attorney. But for children, the children's interest can be central in the mediation process, whereas often what happens in the litigation context is that children actually become like objects that they start to fight for. So it becomes a very problematic situation in which children are put in the middle. And research shows that children who are in the middle are more likely to have severely negative outcomes from divorce. Child support agreements are made in both contexts, but in a mediation context, compliance with those agreements tends to be around 80% rather than 40%. Again, emotional costs tends to be a little bit more positive. It's a little bit more comfortable and cooperative than in a litigation context, which is shown to increase anxiety and stress. The impact on communication is different as well. In a litigation context, there's very little discussion or communication between disputants, whereas in a mediation context, you're sitting down at the table together and you're making decisions together. Clients make their own decision within mediation, whereas judges and attorneys make the decision in a litigation context. And of course, if you're doing a litigation approach, there's a public record available, and a mediation is fully confidential. If you would like to take a little bit more time to look at that chart, I would encourage you to go back a moment in the lecture and take a look at the URL and go ahead and put that into your own browser and take a look at all of the details very carefully. It's very interesting, and I think a wonderful case for mediation as an effective conflict resolution strategy. Let's talk now about how satisfied people are with the mediation context. With mediation for the divorce context. Are clients always satisfied? Usually. Usually both men and women leave feeling satisfied, but not always. Research by Lori and Shaw in 2010 shows that mediation research is a little bit inconsistent on satisfaction results. In general, it seems that people are happier with mediation than with litigation, and certainly the National Conflict Resolution Center's data and chart that we just saw would back that up. However, there are studies that show that mothers can be less satisfied than fathers in the divorce mediation context, but then other studies on the same subject found no major differences between mothers and fathers. I would suggest that the context for each family matters. One study also found that people were dissatisfied with the actual process of mediation not just the outcome. They found it to be rushed and emotionally stressful, and some people in divorce mediation were actually confused and thought that the purpose of mediation was to save the marriage, not to manage the divorce well. So there can obviously be some issues with the research in this area, and people don't always understand what's going on. So the next question is, do people have a better relationship after a mediation? Again, the jury's out on this one. Research is inconsistent, according to Shaw. Some studies suggest that mediation has a modest ability to change basic relationship patterns in a relationship with an ex-spouse. Mediation does not produce cooperative couples, though. We should note that. This does not make people work together again perfectly well. Divorce is happening for a reason, but mediation has found to be less damaging to the relationship than litigation. And other research has found even more positive results, finding that people who went with the litigation option experienced far more damage to their relationship than people who opted for mediation. So some studies find a really big difference with a positive emphasis on mediation, and other studies find a slightly smaller difference. But again, mediation would still be the more positive experience. So how do kids fare in mediation? Here, the literature is consistent. Significantly more joint custody awards are made in mediation than in litigation. However, there is no significant difference in the amount of child support paid or number of days the children would spend with a non-residential parent. But we do know that the emotional outcome of a less hostile divorce tends to be highly positive for kids. After looking at all of the research and conducting her meta-analysis, Shaw concluded that mediation provides significantly more benefit than litigation.